to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello everyone, it's so good to be back with you. Welcome to Season 6 of Raising Teens. I'm your host, Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and also a parent in the middle of raising my own teen and young adult children. I started this podcast because I know that many teens are struggling, and I wanted to create an online village of support for parents. I'm joined again this season by well-known experts on teen mental health and well-being. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with and loving your teen. Commonly known as the Queen of Common Sense, Maggie Dent has become one of Australia's favourite parenting authors and educators. Her experience includes teaching, counselling, and working in palliative care and suicide prevention. Maggie is an advocate for the healthy, common sense raising of children in order to strengthen families and communities. She has a particular interest in the early years, adolescence, and resilience, and is an undisputed boy champion. She's the author of 9 major books, including her best-selling boys books, From Boys to Men and Mothering Our Boys. Maggie is the proud mother of 4 wonderful sons and an enthusiastic and grateful grandmother. Hello, Maggie. What an honor to have you on this podcast. You and I have followed each other. Well, I've followed you for a very long time, so I'm just so thrilled to have you on the Raising Teens podcast. You have your own story or two of being a mother of boys, so I'd love you to just talk about yourself and your family and give us a little bit about you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thanks for what you do in this space as well, because we both share a big passion. Okay, so I'm the mum of 4 sons. They're now men, but oh my golly, what a ride. I was thinking just then, what could I share to give you an idea of how kind of much fun it was? You know, I think that's one of the things I'm discovering, fortunately, because I was raised on a farm with quite a large family. My little brother was my best mate. He was a lamb, so he was just the sweetest boy. So it was really lovely that I didn't come into my teaching with a perception that all boys are tough and they're all loud and they're all rude and so I came with this other understanding. But it's so funny because one of the stories that I share, when they were quite little, I have what I call a rooster, a lamb, a rooster and a lamb, which means my feisties are sandwiching those little lamb in the middle. It was Easter. He was about 5 and we'd done an Easter egg hunt and he's got about 6 in his hand and he's come up to me literally and said, "Mummy, I don't need 6." And his older brothers fixed that up quite quickly, right? And I remember him just looking, going, okay, and what? And then when they were older, oh my gosh, I was really lucky because we had a house that was kind of had a downstairs garage. And I knew intuitively from years of teaching and counselling that they need their own space. So we got a pool table and couches and a fridge. I only kept the dartboard for a little while because, of course, it was a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, the fridge is fantastic. Yeah. The dartboard.
Yeah, no, don't go the dartboard. And I came down a couple of times because it was a Saturday night, and I'm an early to bedder. So I'd gone down at 8:30 and said, "Guys, 9:30 I go to bed. Don't want any more noise. Are we okay on that?" Yeah, no worries. But of course, when you win a game of pool, you're very loud. And there's one particular boy with a very, very loud voice. So I've gone down at 20 to 10 and said, "Now listen, it's after 9:30. If I have to come down again, I'm coming down naked." And there was this stunned look around the room. And I know my boys are going, "No, she really will." Anyway, 10:20, there was a lot more noise. And I've topped to the top of the stairs and threw the door really loud open as though I'm coming down. Now, apparently they left so quickly. Some of them fell over as they ran out the door. And one of them thinks I was naked. He was so traumatized, but I actually wasn't. So, like I say, boundaries are still boundaries.
Yeah, with humour, clearly,
Yes.
Maggie. And I think that is so part of what I've always heard you talk about, having the boundaries, but still having parts of humor in your parenting. So you talk in your book about the changes that happen in the teenage years and how this, for some parents, it can be a bit of a shock or a bit of a surprise, but for some it's really rough when it is almost like your son wakes up as someone new, or you see that change very quickly. Can you talk us through this process a little bit?
Yeah, I actually say I got it from parents coming up to me saying, look, it's like an alien just came in overnight and stole my son and left them with this moody, grumpy, monosyllabic boy I don't recognize anymore, who's now forgotten how to put the milk back in the fridge or where his clothes need to go in the laundry. And, it is a bit like that, and it can be like that. And you almost think there must be something we're doing wrong here. I need to come down tougher on him. And it's almost the opposite, because we can't see what's going on underneath. And you are very familiar. We have body changes, physical changes, hormonal changes, cognitive changes. We have changes in the emotional brain. And then on top of all that, we have surges of testosterone, which is a really profoundly hot kind of, hormone. So when the first part of this all happens is they get to feel strange and confused. The confusion is just like, what the heck? And of course, having taught them in this window, you'll often see them doing incredibly dumb things, like unbelievably, and there's a reason underneath that as well. So their impulsivity increases, and actually there's evidence that their empathy drops, which isn't what you really need.
If you would like to know a bit more about your teen son's developing brain, have a listen to my chat with Michael Nagel in Season 5, Episode 1.
When we understand, and I know I've had so many mums who've read the book who said, I gave my 14-year-old son the chapter on the brain changes and how it might impact him. And he has come in later and said, well, it would have been good to know it before it happened. And I think that's exactly the pragmatism of boys and men. Could you let me know what could possibly happen as my brain starts pruning? Because it does impact their ability to make good decisions, to reflect, to get their homework finished, to be able to get off their gaming at a reasonable hour. And when we see it as though they intentionally make poor choices, Collett, that's when we shame our boys. And you and I both know that boys are shamed so much more from the get-go for all sorts of reasons that make me very, very cross. So they are equally as sensitive. I would actually say even more sensitive than our girls in this window, because they don't have the kind of verbal capacity to process those things and work it out as we do. And so often the big feelings come out in physicality. And I had a beautiful boy in one of my year 11 classes. So we're often thinking that 16, the brain's kind of gotten to a slightly better state, like there's a bit more prefrontal. He sat down about 10 minutes into my class. He suddenly kicked his desk, kicked the chair, and walked over and punched the wall really hard and walked outside. Now, all the kids were equally as shocked as me. And later on, when I was with him, helping him kind of de-escalate with a glass of water, fortunately, I'm not that shouty teacher, he said, oh, I failed my maths test. So what had happened from the class that he'd been in maths to the time that he exploded, and, he just got to his tipping point, and it explodes physically. And so often we then want to feel we need to punish a boy who's had an explosion of really big feelings. So when we can understand it, and that's the passion of writing, is when you can see it through the boy's lens, then how you approach it afterwards. Do you know, because they're hungry as all of us for, unconditional love, connection, support, and someone who can help me make sense of why on earth this is quite so confusing, because it's incredibly confusing.
I find you've got such a beautiful analogy in your book about the cracked windscreen. Tell my listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, because it's so frustrating. And I mean, it happens for girls as well. So in other words, the way they see the world, it used to be the same as you, like the same lens. So you could have a conversation about something and they could, see where you're coming from. So the growth in their autonomy and their sense of self collides with the increase in their inner voice, which of course is often a negative inner voice. And they're trying to work out the world without you kind of giving it to them. So the cracked windscreen means how they see it will be quite different to you. And I remember that advertisement we had there right across Australia that was respect yourself. It was designed to encourage teens to not drink as much. And it just had scenes of young people very, very drunk. And so with our windscreen, we're looking at that going, yeah, that's pretty disrespectful behaviour, isn't it? Yeah, no, that really is. To a teen, they often saw it as, man, I can't wait till I get that maggoted. That looks like the best fun on the planet. What a party, right? And that's why we've got to understand it sometimes that they do see it differently, and their capacity to pause, ponder, reflect, decide, that's still growing. And as you know, girls, the prefrontal tends to finish in the very early 20s. Boys, we're now getting evidence from neuroscience, it's closer to 30. So sorry to all those who are hoping it happens sooner rather than later.
So, Maggie, just from your experience professionally, but also as a mum of 4, did you see that kind of change? I've got 3 kids. Even my 2 boys are so different to each other. What was your experience?
Totally different. You're absolutely correct. My 2 roosters were much more argumentative and really about power and being heard and listen to my argument, and everyone else is doing it and you're not letting me. The 2 lambs really became more inward, and I found that they were hiding more in their bedroom and not wanting to participate in things that were challenging them. So you're right, temperament definitely influences the way that those things happen. So quite often I found you had to work out, how is this boy growing through this journey and how do I best support this boy? So I write in the book about me needing to write mum letters. So sometimes, particularly the roosters, they're the ones who are pushing all the bounds and probably been making the more dangerous choices. If I had a chat to them, and I would have mum chats at times, one-on-one with nobody else around, saying I'm a little bit concerned with what I'm seeing at the moment. If I wanted to explain why, they just already turned off. She's just going to criticise me. And what it was when it was really important and kept me awake, I realised I needed to write it down, because we know that boys will forget the important conversation. They might remember a bit of it, but 4 days later, they've eaten 15 ton of cereal and they've had 8 erections that were unplanned, and they've just, and they're on their phone. They're not going to remember it. So I wrote these letters, and they only ever went to the rooster boys, because the others they just didn't push those bounds. They were already more empathetic and caring. And so I did that feedback sandwich. Say something lovely about them, say what you're really concerned about, make some suggestions on better choices, then another line at the bottom of how much I love you, to the moon and back. And what I found is they would read them over and over. We never had to have another conversation on it. And it's so funny, because the 2 roosters ended up moving from WA to Sydney to live together. One's a lawyer and one's in finance, because obviously WA was too small for them. And I sent some raffle tickets to them. And they chose not to open the envelope because they both thought it was a mum letter. And that was the only time they ever had a conversation about getting a mum letter, not that they ever shared what they were, because that was that discreet, confidential, one-on-one approach to wanting to be able to bring something serious into that space, because they're so sure you're just going to tell them what to do. That doesn't always work with girls or boys.
I find it fascinating you talking about one of my boys is absolutely a rooster, and I do the letters with him, and I'm actually fascinated how you are talking about how only your rooster boys needed the letters. So is my rooster son. That's amazing. Talk us a little bit through the temperaments of the rooster and the lamb.
Well, you've got a rooster, I think, from the get-go. So on the continuum, they're high energy, confident, they have a heightened sense of their own importance. They're fearless, they're brave, they will do the things that you just wish they weren't doing. They question things much more often. They're often the loudest or the extroverted kind of person. And while all of those qualities are noble, there is a tendency to be all about me. And of course, in that drop in empathy in adolescence, we've really got to be mindful we're keeping an eye on that, because that's where you can sometimes see that both on their gaming chat spaces and online, and in the way they interact with other boys and other kids in classrooms. On the other end, very end, is the lambs, and they're so sweet, so sensitive, so empathetic. One of my lambs, when I was very stressed with 4 boys, regardless of what age, I would tell them I'm having a bath. Bubbles, candles, all quiet, my music, done. When he was 14, which is not a wonderful age for boys to have empathy and concern, he came to me in the kitchen one night after I'd had a very busy day, full-time work, basketball coaching, you name it. He said to me, "Mum, I've run you a bath." So what we want our kids to do is get into the middle. So they're able to access this assertiveness and confidence and courage. However, they're also able to access a sense of understanding how their behaviour impacts on others. Can they care about the environment? Can they care about their mates? So I think that's the challenge for us. And that, so the oldest Brewster came to me. We started having a little bit argy-bargy in our conversations when he was 12. And so I had one of those chats on the deck. A chat on the deck is me, kind of my arms on the deck. You can look out don't look at me, just look at the ocean. And I said, "I'm a bit worried. You seem to be we're not really getting on, and you seem to kind of get, a bit abrupt with me." And he said, "Yeah, I can see you're trying to control me." And I said, "Can you give me a specific example, please?" And the example he gave me was the subtlest form of manipulation I have probably ever tried. And he was actually right. I was trying to get into maximum choices that I felt were better. And I said, "So how do we overcome that?" He said, "I just want to make my own choices." I said, "But you're 12. So your prefrontal hasn't grown." He said, "I just would like to." So I said, "You do realise with every choice there's a consequence. Some of them are good and some of them aren't. So are you prepared to accept the consequences that come from making those choices?" And literally, he is now a lawyer of a massive law firm, second, almost a partner. So of course he was a part lawyer to get with. He said yes. Anyway, I didn't have any input in the courses he did, his extracurricular, and it was so interesting because he got to year 11, which is almost like, 12, 13, 14, 16, 4 years later. And I used to teach at the same school, and the student services, he came home one day and he said to me, "Oh, by the way, Mum, I'm going to have one day at an accounting firm during the school week." And I went, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." And he said, "No, they haven't done it before, but I had such a good argument that they decided they would." And when I spoke to the head of student services, who was actually a friend of mine, he said, "No, his argument was really good." And I thought, wow, I always felt I know what's best for this one, right? So not all our kids are ready for those things, but if they are, we've got to kind of step back a little, because it is that I'm individuating. I'm becoming my own person. I'm going to make mistakes. But if you keep holding on to me, I'm going to be resentful. I'm going to be rebellious. We're not going to get on. And it's going to be harder for me to want to respect what you want for me.
And I know that you talk about this. A lot of our boys are somewhere on the continuum. But I think also what I'm hearing you say is what I feel like I say quite often to parents is your kind of umbrella parenting is going to be the same for most of your children, but even under that umbrella, you're going to have very individual differences, because some things you do with your rooster, your lamb would absolutely crumble if you interacted with them in the same way. So you do parent differently for different children, and that's not inequality.
Oh, no. And that's exactly it, that there's not one size fits all. And I remember the year 9, my lamb, I had to literally push him to school camp. Right. And yet he is the most fearless of my boys in the ocean. So it wasn't that he lacked bravery, but his interpersonal skills weren't as strong, and he just was more sensitive in social situations, which is, that's what we help to identify. If we keep focusing on what their strengths are, not just what their flaws are, I think that helps us just to be the coach they need to say, "Look, I notice you really struggle around this. Do you think should we get you a part-time job where you're able to just serve people and get used to be able to speak? Or you tell me when you think you're ready for that. Or is there some other activity you can do?" Or, but it's working with them, because as you know, when they've got agency, the journey is so different. And that's the whole challenge, isn't it, of parenting, changing the parenting from, before we have adolescence and when it arrives. And I absolutely, there's a core in boys that need to feel respect, and respecting that they're feeling challenged. I know it sort of sounds like, how do you do that? But really going, "Oh, gee, that sounds really tough." And what are your plans around that? What are your thoughts around that? And, can I help you with that plan? Rather than immediately leap in with what I think is going to fix it.
Something I am continually wrestling with as a mum is that fine line between smothering my sons and allowing them to develop independence and autonomy. I have to admit, letting my sons face disappointment or pain and letting them learn from their own mistakes is one of the hardest parts of parenting for me. But if I don't, I risk becoming a smother mother. So according to Maggie, smother mothers restrict their sons' freedom and often invade their boundaries. They check up on them too often and they ask endless questions. And they need to micromanage everything from subjects to friends to social media. That's not to say that boundaries are not important. We know they're vital. We'll be talking about rites of passage and letting go a little later in the season. Yeah, and I think sometimes as parents, we can feel like if we don't manage the aspects of their lives, somehow they won't cope or they will go off the rails. And for some of our children, they need more independence or more opportunities like your rooster son to actually make those decisions still within the boundaries and having consequence. But you talk about the bridge to manhood. Is that kind of what happens on that bridge?
Yeah, so we all know that we're designed to go through a transition phase in terms of changing from child to adult. And they are all very different, as you know. Some go in early, some are 6'3" and at 12 years of age, and some are sort of like mine all went at very different ages. So what they're doing on that journey is, once again, the brain is obviously starting to trim and prune and make changes so that can become a mature adult brain. The body has to make the changes so that basically we can keep the species alive. And that's why there will be an emerging sexuality, because that's exactly what they're supposed to be in that space for. And that when we recognize that, they still need the rails on the bridge. And what I think the digital world has done is kind of shifted some of that, because our kids are seeing stuff that they would never have seen prior to this. They're learning stuff that we would not want them to learn, that are contrary to our family values, that you don't even know they're following or looking at. They're watching pornography that we could, once again, those magazines were really quite tame compared to what our kids can see. And it's not them going looking, it's stumbling on it as well. So we've got a world that's shaping our boys' awareness, consciousness, character. And I write really a lot about character, because we can help shape that character, but we don't shape it by grounding them, busting them, taking their devices off and punishing them. It's that same thing. We come beside them so that we can help them grow in those moments where they will make mistakes. We know they need rails on the bridge, and we know they step a little bit back from their parents, which is exactly what they're meant to do. But my challenge, you and I both share this, there's got to be significant lighthouse figures in their lives who are safe adults. And, I didn't realize just how powerful that was when I was teaching, because I was obviously the lighthouse figure for most of my students. And years later, it was when they'd stop me and say, thanks, you're the one who took me aside one day and said, no, listen, marks aren't everything. You've got a lot of drive and a lot of energy. You're the one who gave me a seed of hope that changed who I am. And I think that's what we have to keep on saying. Everybody can play a positive part in the role of teens, even the ones who are really giving their parents curry and are sneaking out the windows and are doing things that are dangerous and risky. They still need someone who looks at them and says, yeah, how you going? How's life? And I think we've all got a head and a phone, and we're missing connection. And of course, today's have just, had a tumultuous couple of years leading into going into high school or being in high school. So they are struggling socially and emotionally. They are really sensitive about being excluded from things, because it all happens right in front of the world. And so we have to keep an eye on them, because they are struggling at a much higher level. Boys will often mask that, won't seek for help, won't talk about it, because that's a sign I really am weak. That whole patriarchy is still saying, you just got to be tough and stoic. Well, again, they are dying because of that message.
I'm just looking here in your book that's in front of me. You have this pie chart, which is just fascinating to me, about boys saying who has helped them or who helped them the most when they were teens. And 56.25% were their mums.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And I find that really encouraging, because I work with a lot of single mums, and they often feel like perhaps they don't have a place anymore. And there's so many single mums who are just doing such an amazing job. And as a mum, it's not your time to step back. You might step back differently or step aside differently, but you don't fully step back from your son, he actually really needs you at that time.
Oh, look, I found that really encouraging because that was my gut instinct, because I noticed in my high school that boys would be looking towards not just the men in their school, but the women who they looked up to and respected. And we have known traditionally in, kinship communities, the grandmother is the one that quite often was the one guiding all the kids, including the boys. And I think what I got from the survey too was the fact that when something really bad happened, they always felt that mum would hold that space, that dad's going to lose his, whatever, dad's going to be tough, that's going to be too scary, I won't go to dad.
You heard me mention Maggie's pie chart that 56% of boys turned to their mothers when they needed help for something. The other 44% covers dads, grandparents, coaches, friends, and lots of others. I know dads often feel like they're not needed, but this is a call for dads to find ways to connect with their sons. Yes, we are seeing dads as more emotionally involved than ever before, but many boys still crave their dad's time and affection. In her book, Maggie mentions that fatherless boys are more likely to struggle in school, with addictions, with criminality, with violence, and depression. In their book, The Boy Crisis, Warren Farrell and John Gray argue that the primary cause of the boy crisis is dad-deprived boys. In the US, boys with some form of absent father syndrome feature more highly in school dropout figures, gangs, mass shootings, and the joining of extremist groups. Not only do these boys hurt others, but they're also more vulnerable to being hurt themselves. Maggie had some men talk about their fathers.
I would have liked my dad to be a bit more open in his love and support. I know he loved me in his own way, but he often used teasing or humour instead of being openly loving and supportive. I wish my father had been more involved, open and honest, and not parented with fear, just been more supportive. I wish my dad had been more present. He was there, but never really in the moment or situation. I wish my father had spent more time discussing the importance of being a good person and respect for women.
Steve Biddle spoke with us in Season 4, Episode 10 about the need for dads to have both backbone and heart. Go back and have a listen if you want to hear more about what it means to be a fully human parent.
So the solo mum one is really interesting because and it is, of course, about the relationship. They were already mum and dadding. They've been doing mum and dadding since they were solo, right? And there are times when we actually can invite other men who maybe are the partners, husbands of our own best girlfriends, to say, look, they often step forward intuitively. But, at the end of the day, our boys are looking at everyone. Who am I going to be? What am I going to be? And so I think it did make my heart sing. And I did love the fact that grandparents features quite highly up with teachers. So again,
I saw that too.
You can't, and I'm looking forward to that. I hope I'm around long enough because I've seen that before, that sometimes when I was counselling, it was the grandmother or the grandfather who brought them in, who was taking them to Macca's afterwards.
Yeah, we've seen, male teachers or grandfathers or uncles step in for boys because they do need healthy male role models. Even in single mum homes, it is important, and I know you see that still as important for some of those men to step up and say, I'm willing to see if this boy will see me as a lighthouse. That is important.
And that's why sometimes we've got to look at, is there any, whatever their special interest, if they're into music, is there a music teacher that's just got a passion for being able to, take them to where their spark is. I write a bit about that spark in adolescence. Where is it? Because so many of them, it's not schoolwork. For some of them, it might be riding a motorbike, or my boys were surfing. And, it's the last thing I wanted to do on a weekend, get out of bed at 5:30 to take a car full of hungry boys surfing. But what I saw afterwards, these boys that were alive, that loved life, that were chatting and full of it. You could just feel the energy. So I think we know that to contemplate ending your life, the spark is not there. And sometimes we need to celebrate that that's what gets them through to start going back to school on Monday, even if they failed maths, even if, they can't write the essay that I was hoping for. And, that was one of the biggest things in the book, was talking about disengagement, because our boys want to know, what's in this for me? Am I going to look okay? Because if I fail maths all the time, why would I want to go to maths in the first place? It's a waste of my time. I'm just going to muck around, and they can be disruptive because they hate failing. And failing is, if we can't find a form of success for them to have in our schools, and it can be the art class, it can be mountain bike riding at, phys ed. There must be somewhere that they go, I've done good.
Yeah. And so when you talk about failing for our boys, is your advice to parents to find somewhere where they're also not failing, where they're doing great? And then what do we do if it's an area they love and they still don't make the team? How do we help our boys? That's one of the hardest things I've found as a parent, is when my kids fail and you want to rescue and fix, and sometimes you just can't and shouldn't.
Yeah, and that's why I always wanted the birthday party games to go back to the old games, because pass the parcel and musical chairs, there's supposed to be one winner.
Not every rapper, somebody has a lolly. Oh, goodness.
Yep. So that's
You're
where
right.
it starts, right? You've had lots of opportunities to lose and regroup and move forward. If your, big experiences are exactly that. And I remember one, so my second rooster, who was, so confident, quite short compared to his mates. It got to year 4, and the first time they had high jump, came home and said, I'm going to win the high jump. And I went, not sure about that one. He said, no, I'm going to win the high jump. And I said, you're not really tall. And he said, no, I'm still going to win the high jump. And I said, the men in our family kind of play football, swim, surf, play golf. They don't boing. I was trying to soften the fact that he was a little over enthusiastic. So along came the competition day, and he got turfed out in the first round, devastated, right? But the universe delivered him a wonderful learning moment, because one of the boys who beat him only had one leg.
Wow.
Now, the boy who beat him happens to come from a family of extreme athletes. He's actually a Paralympian at the moment and an absolutely wonderful human. But can you imagine, for a boy that was overconfident, he needed to learn some humility. So he took off and hid in the bus. They often want to hide so no one can see them, so they can cry, right? Let them cry. Let them, instead of kick something and smash something, let them cry. And I left him in there for quite a while. There's a part of me that wanted to rescue him with an ice cream. And I remember going, no, I need him to be in this moment. I need him to feel this bigger feeling. I need him to let it go by himself. When he comes out of the bus, I might buy the whole group of boys an ice cream. And that is one of those life experiences, because you won't always get the job you want. You won't always, it won't, you're going to get rejected. And we know it's a biological terror to be excluded and rejected, because we're a social species. And that's exactly why we just go, I know it's tough. It just sucks. And it's those moments of not talking. Boys don't want to talk about it. We let it be. We let the dust settle. 2 or 3 days later, we might check in to see how they're doing. And I was lucky that mine played basketball as well. And Michael Jordan got cut from his high school, and that story really supported my boys, that he worked, because he was a bit shorter. He worked so hard on his skills so that the next year he could be. And that's really what I said. So you can either accept this as a failure that you can't do anything about, or you can see that it's a sign that there's an area you could work on. And that's exactly me as an English teacher. If you didn't pass this test right now, I need to double check it's the way I taught the lesson and the content, or the way the question was worded, or did you do enough preparation work on, and how can we fix it? So when we see there's a gift in failure, and I write a lot about, that's where the reason today's kids are struggling more with resilience. We're not letting them fail. We're scooping them up. We're running, we're carrying their bags into the school till they're in about year 6. We're running up the lunchbox when they've forgotten it. We're rescuing them from everything. And unfortunately, it's not to their advantage later, because we're not always going to be there. And that emerging adult needs to know, this is what happens, and I know how to get through this. I have a confidence. I will survive. I will survive.
And so what do we do then, Maggie? I have some parents who say to me, I feel like we've tried all these things to encourage our son and encourage him, in his sport or school and so on. But he just seems so unmotivated. He just seems really lazy and I don't know what to do. What do you say to parents in those situations?
Yeah, look, motivation is a really interesting thing. We know that it's to do with 3 levels of who we are. It's the connection. So is there a connection with either the person who's teaching it or whatever? 2 is the how competent am I at it? I think I'm a failure. I can't get motivated. I'm going to fail. And that 3rd one again is control. Is it my choices? So I have a really big section in the book about the 18-year-old stuck on the couch because, that's a really, they can't wait to leave school. Cannot wait to leave school. It's like, whoa, my life begins. But there's often a lull there that if you haven't been accepted into something or you haven't made up your mind or deep down you really don't know that you've got what it takes to launch out into the world, you will just become immobilized.
Yeah.
And so my key message in that is, once again, it's little tiny steps rather than, as soon as you start forcing them, you're going to get the pushback and they'll stay on the couch for another 6 months. So we talk to them about what are we doing that are going to build your skill level so that when you do decide to do something, it's going to be of value, because we notice they're getting their license later for this reason, partly scared I'm going to fail, but also I don't know if I'm brave enough. So we sit with them and we create a plan. And that might just be, how about you go up to grandparents' farm and just help out for a week or so, because they'll spoil him rotten, but he'll also be out there doing things he wouldn't be doing in your house.
Yes.
So moving the environment is a really good one. And the small steps of success, a barista course is a 1 day, or responsible serving of alcohol, or a first aid course. Let them choose. So here are the 3 courses that you can choose in the next month. Which one would you like to do? So the agency's still there. You leave it with him. Right? And then he's got to get, if he's home, he's hanging the washing out. He's doing the washing. He's going to have to vacuum. In other words, there are things that he's got to do while he's in his limbo land. And I think to be able to earn that privilege of being able to access his gaming or his, online behaviours, then he's got to contribute. And it's a really, you want to scream, you want to push him, and every time you do that, he goes backwards.
Yes.
And sometimes it's that other person. The lighthouse figure is the one they can sit with going, so tell me some of your dreams and see if we can work out a way you can get moving towards that dream. And there's no hurry. Life's a big, long journey. That's the biggie. Yeah. And I think when you go back to the younger, I just need to normalise that boys have been disengaging from year 6 forever.
Yeah. Right?
Because they're just going, this sucks, And I remember a boy in year 12 saying to me, I don't need to learn to write an essay, miss. And I said, why not? And he said, because I'm going to play football for Australia. You don't have to write essays. And I had to explain to him there's no guarantee of that outcome, right? And anyway, there's a long story, and I mentioned a bit of it in the book, but that particular boy got to a very high level in his football, had a really nasty injury and wasn't able to get to his peak. And while his parents were helping him, he was 22 at the time, work out what are you going to do the rest of your life, he'd spent so much time in rehab and physio that he decided to be a physiotherapist. And he ran into me one day and said to me, how you told me that story? He said, I was so glad you taught me how to write an essay because I needed to know. You don't know what life's going to bring, but to convince a boy it could possibly, it's not always easy. And so it's the small steps, and always letting them know that you've got their back and that you love them no matter where and how bumpy that moment of disengagement or absolutely lack of motivation is, that we've still got you. We tell them we love them. We do whatever it is to bring a smile on their face. We practice kindness. We bring the Milo in. We give them a snack. And, if they're not saying much, you know what I've said before, Collett? You just go in and do a small fart, well-timed fart. It's a beautiful form of connection with a teenage boy who's struggling.
Yeah, yep, there's the humour again. In my first book, I write about the difference between shame and guilt. Shame leads to the feeling, I am bad, or I'm unlovable, or I'm unforgivable. Whereas guilt says, I did something bad, but I can change this, or I can do something different next time. I know it seems subtle, but shame is linked to anxiety, depression, and lots of other issues. So what does shame look like? It could look like ignoring, silent treatment, freezing your son out, rolling your eyes when he says something, swearing at your child, or being sarcastic whenever your son says something, even being passive-aggressive in your comparisons. Maggie says it could sound like, "Oh, grow up. You're so childish. You're just hopeless. What's wrong with you? Be a man. Stop being stupid. Why can't you just be more like your brother? Please do everything you can to avoid shaming your son. Be the safe place and treat them with kindness." Maggie talks next about healthy boundaries without shaming or using overly harsh punishments, those that are too lengthy and unreasonable. These just create resentment and it pushes our sons away from us. It doesn't really teach them anything.
Yeah, without the shame. So interestingly enough, my boundaries were more to do with the big ones were no parties until you're in year 11 and 16, which meant that they had to sneak to get to parties, right? And there weren't many, and I actually knew about them anyway, but the rule in my house was that wasn't okay. So, because there's some excitement, isn't there, in pushing a boundary if you're a rooster. And over 16, then you had to work out exactly how to navigate that space because they were going to have to leave our country town and go to the city for uni. I needed them to work that one out. So the very, very simple rules was, I never, ever provided alcohol. They usually had to drink other people's, which I felt was, taking one for the team. Everyone drank less. Secondly, that they were not allowed in a car with anyone who'd been drinking. They either walk, they call the cab and I pay for that when it comes, or else they call me. And that was really big. But I also wanted to talk to them about what do you do in certain situations. I want you to keep an eye out for your friends. And that's not just your male friends, your girl mates, because they had really good girl mates, these boys. They didn't have sisters, but they'd adopted some people as sisters. They weren't in any way romantically inclined. Because I said sometimes in parties, girls get impacted by alcohol far quicker than boys. And there are slimy, unsafe guys around who want to take advantage of that. Many years later, one of my boys rang me from hospital in Perth, emergency department, because he nearly lost his eyesight in his eye. And he was at a party where there was a guy who was, starting to be really physical with a girl at the party, and he stepped in to protect her. And one of his mates hit him sideways. And then it was on for one and all, and the girl was able to be saved. But, if they're too drunk, then we've got to get them home. The responsibility is watch out for your mates, watch out for your friends. And then what's the difference between falling asleep and an alcoholic coma? Because that one there, when we actually teach them these things, what would you do if? And that's what I do before you went off to a party. What are you going to do if, you've lost your phone, you can't find your way home, you don't know where you are? What are you going to do if gate crashes arrive? What are you going to do if someone offers you this, or this, right? So it was the what if. And I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, their responses were they were all over it. So why would I waste my energy lecturing? Because you don't hear the bit that might have been helpful. And one of them did actually thought he was only about 8 Ks away from home when he went to this party. And I was getting worried the next morning because he wasn't home. And that was before he had his own phone. And ended up being over 20 kilometres away. So he was still walking. He and his mate were still walking at 9:45 next morning. And he said, gee whiz, we did. I said, see, another lesson. You've learned another lesson about check how far you are before you decide you're going to walk. Hey, that's a really good one. Well done, you. But you know what I mean? So I think it's those places. Mine were really, really strict. That was my biggest one, was watching out for your friends, watching out for others. So you're not just a self-absorbed male in it for yourself. They are biologically wired, as you know, to be more concerned of their friends than themselves. So I think we need to work on that one. So I'm saying, are your friends okay around that space? Is that a safe house for you to go to? Or, is somebody, and they'll often talk to you about that, but they won't if you ask them, are you doing? No, they won't talk to you about that because, of course, that just shut down.
Exactly.
And that's why I really recommend, if you want to hear what's going on in boys' lives, you pick them up from something, whether it's sport or, a gathering, and you drive the long way home because they forget you're driving, and you will hear all sorts of things going on that they're just oblivious that you're driving the car. So it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And so finally, Maggie, what is your hope for our teen boys in today's world?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because you've seen such a big shift culturally in our society where men are now absolutely hands-on, heart-centered dads. Like, it just makes my heart melt that probably their own dad wasn't able to do that. So we had this big cultural shift in that direction, and we had great hope for today's teen boys. And then they're getting marinated in all this sexualized stuff that's actually not giving them the guidelines on how to be in an intimate, safe relationship. We're not learning communication. And so I guess there's my worry there, but I absolutely still would say that I find absolute majority of boys are big-hearted, beautiful humans, and they respond to people who treat them with that love and respect. And that, you'll find far more nice teen boys out there than you'll find nasty ones, but the nasty ones get to get all the media and get to paint a picture for the rest of them. But I absolutely can tell you, they blow my mind away so often, even in my own community.
I love that Maggie reminds us how mothers, fathers, foster parents, step-parents, grandparents, teachers, and so many others have such a crucial role to play in this window of our son's development. I want to end with this quote. The boys who thrive as they race or stumble across that bridge to adulthood are those who have consistent, loving, and predictable parent figures who have ridden the tumultuous years and never given up. If you would like to know more about Maggie's work or her books, you can find her at maggiedent.com. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode via email or my Facebook page or via raisingteens.au. Or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.